I will ask a number of questions before I give to the audience. I wanted to start with you, Rafael. The question I had for you is, from the BCTA companies, what we've been hearing and what you've been saying is that there's a lot of challenges to scale. Providing incentives, sector level or general incentives from the government to build these public-private partnership is a key part of that. But of course, the government says, well, we have to understand the impact of businesses, these projections. What does it mean in order for us to provide these incentives? How do you think we can, given the focus, our joint focus on impact reporting and getting companies to try to share the result, how do you think we can do a better job of supporting the corporate sector in countries like Philippines and other to report on their impact?
Is this mic working?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's a very good question because one of the things that we observe in the Philippines, there are actual attempts of companies to actually create business models that are inclusive. And if you scan it, it's really across businesses. However, I think the story of inclusive business is not told in that sense. So in other words, there is no lens being used insofar as inclusive business is concerned. Therefore, the challenge, I think, is really to start telling the story of inclusive business as it is being practiced right now. I mean, I was just looking, for instance, at telecommunication in the Philippines. We're probably the largest tech capital in the world, where we have over 1 billion SMS messages daily being transmitted all over the place, precisely because of the mobile phone penetration that has happened in the country. And part of this really was brought about by the innovation of prepaid SIM cards and also the innovation on electronic load being passed from phone to phone, and also coming up with a lot of promotions of unlimited text messaging or unlimited voice messaging that allows for lower income BOP people to actually have access to communication facilities. And clearly that measurement of how we've democratized mobile technology in the Philippines is not told in that sense. The only thing that's being told is the market share that a company is able to create because of the innovation that's happening in the product or in the service that's been created. So therefore, I think the challenge of a BCTA and a PBSP collaboration could actually look into how do we measure this kind of impact? What are the metrics that allow for us to prove using to show evidence that by innovating on products, by innovating on services, you're actually able to scale up the impact to a vast majority of our countrymen. Same thing with socialized housing. There's something that's evolving right now. We have a huge informal settler problem in the Philippines, especially in the major urban centers, which is also clogging our floodways and in a way creates all kinds of natural disasters that we could actually avoid. And recently, there's been a challenge to actually relocate about 100,000 families that are in the floodways. And already, a lot of the real estate companies, or some of the real estate companies in the Philippines, have already collaborated with local government units to actually create models of inclusive growth in socialized housing, where local governments allow for subsidies to actually come in so that the cost on a per unit basis becomes more affordable to a low-income family. Studies showed, for instance, that an informal settler family in the Philippines would pay anywhere from about 2,500 to about 5,000 pesos a month to have access to a 10 square meter area in a very invested informal settler community. And given that kind of price point that they were looking at, about 2,500 to 5,000, what the real estate company did essentially was to work back and compute what will it take for us to actually build a 28 square meter decent home and allow for an amortization of about 2,500 to 5,000 as well. And working closely with the local government, they were able to do that. And now they've relocated over 300 to 500 families in one city. And slowly, we are now developing the model, sharing the model to other real estate companies for possible adoption. So I think the challenge is really that, create the evidence, create the quantifiable evidence to actually prove that this works and it makes business sense. Because the real estate company who did this said, of course, there are a lot of high-rise, high-end condominiums being also built in the Philippines given the growth that we're experiencing these days. But he said there's so much money to actually be made in socialized housing, precisely because of the volume of need that is there. And again, it's a market-driven thing, but more than a market-driven thing, it is a very clear social need that the country needs to address.
Thank you.
Marcos, sitting at the UN, from your perspective, I mean, here we see the examples of Kenya and we see Philippines, where clearly the ecosystem is starting to speak about inclusive business, and there is great ownership both from the private and the public to do this. How do you see we can foster this in other countries? What are the ways we can work to catalyze more of this type of multi-stakeholder inclusive business platforms in other countries, including emerging ones?
Thanks, Saba. I think, let me start with a reflection. I think the academia, a few years back, laid down the groundwork of what are we discussing here and what are we seeing here in the Philippines and in Kenya is the beginning of bringing to life, what Michael Portman called share value, with C.K. Prahalad called about the part of the pyramid. So the academia laid down the work of the interaction between the private sector and the development community, going beyond the corporate social responsibility, and I think inclusive business is a good name, if we want to give any, to this beyond. It's not replacing, corporate social responsibility didn't replace philanthropy, it's just evolving, right? I think BCTA, the business call to action, it is a classic example, Saba, on how we can do that from a multilateral point of view, right? So BCTA is an alliance. We at UNDP have the pleasure and the honor to host the secretariat of the BCTA, but it's basically, you've got USAID, you've got the FID, you've got the Danish, your AUSAID, the Global Compact, and others in it. And basically, BCTA itself is an evolution, right? So BCTA started with finding some of you that were doing your great work, and then kind of bringing you into a peer alliance, bringing you into talking to each other, giving you some visibility and platform. And then I think what BCTA has learned is if we want to take this to scale, we need to not only have the individual companies that are working in the inclusive business space, but then it's starting to find the rappers and the Patricks and finding the other people that are combining the individual companies together, bringing the government, bringing civil society, and creating this, I guess the buzzword of the day, the ecosystem, So when we go forward, right, we are building the infrastructure necessary for transforming the whole of business, right? Globally, we are in a very auspicious moment, as Sigrid mentioned with the post-2015, right? How can we look forward and how can we say that, in the next global agreement on development framework, that business will basically be an integral part of it, but recognizing that not all, for the purpose of development, not all business create equal, right? What we have here in those fantastic examples and in your work is the type of business that generates most of the job, most of the taxes, most of the economic growth, but at the same time is paying decent wages, getting people to have a dignified life, and so on and so forth. I fundamentally believe that BCTA, other platforms out there, that we as the United Nations be able to have host forums like this, our network of offices around the world will facilitate a process that will start to gaining momentum, and over the years see a shift in the percentage of business that we can call inclusive business, and once a tipping point is reached, right, hopefully what you can see at that stage is that those that are that we no longer have to call inclusive business. All business will be inclusive. Those that are not inclusive business, they won't be called the non-inclusive business.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You noted, thank you, Marcos, very useful. Patrick, in your presentation that, as we know, Kenya has been at the forefront of innovation and scale around mobile money, which was the first breakthrough market
inclusive business, that you saw a whole market develop. What are the challenges of replicating the success in some of the other sectors you mentioned, agri and some of the education and all the other ones? And how do you think it could be addressed?
I think the simple challenge that exists when you talk about development activities is that when you work as a government, you tend to want to sort of create a framework, a regulation, and you do all sorts of clever things that actually make it difficult to happen
Right.
in the first place. The success of mobile money was that there was no regulation around it, and it grew organically because people were willing to innovate in an unregulated environment. But it was the only regulation was that you had a platform that was fixed. So when you talk about the other sectors, what you need to do is to create basically a system, an ecosystem where people can begin to be innovative without having the shackles of saying, you must get this permit, you must do this, you must do that, and so forth. And effectively, that is what will drive innovation in a country.
Right.
And when you talk about the agricultural sector and so forth, you have all these things about it, the fact that you must apply for a permit to get water, to do this, to do that, all these things that have to happen. So when somebody wants to do anything on a big scale, you're actually stopped from doing it because of all those regulations. And I think that what we have to do going forward is to find a way of allowing mass movements into an area and then put the regulations to control it once people see that the idea is good. And that really is a lesson from the development of M-Pesa. Yeah. Completely unregulated, grew up in a viral manner, and then effectively legislation came in. But that legislation now is to put it into a framework that works. And even then, with the regulations in, you're finding a lot of new innovative products using the same platform happening now. Like, for example, the bottom of the pyramid insurance. How does somebody who is selling vegetables on a street corner get a life insurance or get a pension and all the rest of it? This is being enabled through now a regulated system whereby that is developed, and now people can begin to put in, sort of 50 cents, US cents a day or a week into that account without leaving their business. They just sort of send it through the mobile phone. And that has created a huge difference at that kind of level now that it can be regulated. But the only reason it was open at that time was it just created the mass of people using the platform.
Great, thank you very much. We open up the floor for questions from the audience. Does anyone have questions? Yes.
Do you have any process with the business call to action to try to replicate some success in what I would call vertical markets, such as real estate or such as mobile payments, to other countries?
Do we have? The question is to me. Yes. Yeah. Well, we are one of the things that the BCTA is very much focused on is we have very much the peer leader validated business models that are quite advanced. To be part of the initiative that have the commitments, we're really looking at the more advanced sort of initiatives. And what we've done is a lot of peer-to-peer, whether sector-based or country-based, where we have discussions between players. If you're in a certain competitive market, sometimes people don't want to talk to each other, but we have from different countries, they're willing to do that. So using that mechanism, we found a very effective way. The biggest issue is really understanding the challenges of doing business with a port. I mean, for a lot of companies who want to start, they really need to see how it's being done by others. I mean, this morning we just had a discussion between two unnamed telecom providers. Titine was here, I introduced to the other one who was thinking of moving in another part of the Middle East and developing a serious business model, but they were not competitors, so they could have that discussion. So that's the kind of mechanism. The other one, which is a new phase we're very keen on, is dialogue. I think if we can create enough of leadership, public-private leadership to support the work of these business models and to try to address and tackle, I think this is another area that we're looking at also. Building. Yeah, case studies. Any other questions? I actually wanted to ask Rafael another question.
Okay.
one of the focus area that we're doing is in Mindanao, which is a region of the country with a long-standing, sort of set of troubles and decades of underinvestment. How do you ensure that your work and of the corporations that you're involved with the government can ensure that we have shared economic value? I mean, it's a place that has gone through conflict.
Yeah, it has gone through conflict, and we're actually still in conflict right now. In fact, when I left Manila, there was an ongoing skirmish actually in one of the cities in Mindanao, and it's, I think, ongoing up to now. Yeah, unfortunately for Mindanao, it's really history has in a way become a major factor there. There's the constant conflict between the more Islamic group in more extremist Islamic group down south, and of course in a predominantly Christian Catholic country. This conflict hasn't been fully resolved, but in fact we did sign a peace agreement just a year ago with one of the major factions of this Islamic group. And actually that was moving quite well until last week when another breakaway group started trouble in one of the cities and continues to linger up to now. But really, as you can see, given that situation, clearly this whole idea of ecosystem, this whole idea of enabling environment is really a very complex situation. And you look at Mindanao, you deal with historical, political situations that need to be addressed by national government as well as local government. And to the extent we're able to put peace and order in a troubled region like Mindanao, is one of the more fundamental challenges that our country needs to address. But other than that, and because of that, actually, because of the problem of conflict, investments both of government as well as private sector has also been delayed. Infrastructure has been delayed primarily because a lot of these insurgent groups have actually created conflict that in a way prevents government to actually pour in resources. There are a lot of people that get in the middle of all of this crossfire. And because of that, of course, investments do not come in. But right now, what has happened because of the major peace agreement that was done that was signed last year, there are very specific areas in Mindanao right now that are ripe for this kind of initiative. And what's being discussed right now is really at a top level policy that allows for this autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao to actually have governing laws that allow for this new ecosystem to be developed within the framework and culture of Islamic rules and regulations as well. And clearly there's a lot of interest because one of the things that we've noticed in areas where large populations of Islamic Filipinos or Muslim Filipinos are located, the distribution of land, for instance, has not been done. And in investments in agriculture, a lot of these large companies actually want to look for big tracts of land that allows for them to manage a more corporate type of arrangement. Underscoring, of course, the fact that other than creating a core farm that allows for their economies of scale to be secured insofar as setting up their plants, they're also very conscious about how to outgrow, how to allow for small landowners surrounding these large tracts of land to actually be part of the ecosystem that allows for more inclusive growth. And therefore, there's a lot of discussion going on there, and that's why we looked at three major crops of rubber, coffee, and cacao, because multinational companies like Nestle, for instance, wants to expand their procurement from the current 30% domestic procurement of 30% and 70% imported. They want to shift this to the other way around, 70% domestic to 30% by 2020. And given that size or that potential production that they need, that needs to happen domestically, the challenge now for the country like the Philippines is to allow for us to make this land available, to allow for farmers to be prepared to actually supply and provide the kind of the quality and the volume that a Nestle company would require. And again, precisely create those engagements of large companies, SMEs, as well as base of the pyramid producers to actually happen. Another group, trading company called Kennemer, which is actually the buying agent of Mars Chocolate, actually is also looking for cacao, again, looking for thousands and thousands of hectares in the Philippines to allow for supply chains to actually be integrated into their product, into their supply chain. And Mindanao is clearly an agriculture area, and that's why we feel, to the extent we're able to create a situation that allows for farmers to be more productive rather than to carry arms, would really be a key factor in initiating peace and consequently development in that place.
Thank you very much, Rafa. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Marcos, for your comments. We wrap up this session. I will ask that Suba comes to the table. Thank you very much.